I get, I don't know, 10 or 12 emails a week for people who want me to review their strange product. And most of the time they're garbage, not anything that I would ever want to bring on the channel. But in this case, it seemed to be a pretty good product that already had a fair amount of solid reviews online. Plus, it was something that I was going to do for the shop anyway. Welcome back to the Born Handy channel, where we take on pretty much anything a handyman might be asked to take on, plus a little extra. Now today's video is about a security camera system, and I'm going to show you what's involved with the install, tell you what I think about the system, and tell you what I think you need to know if you're going to want to do one of these installations yourself. This is an 8-channel 4K power over Ethernet system from a company called, pardon me if I mess this name up, Onwote. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, please let me know in the comments how it's supposed to be pronounced. I don't want to say it wrong, but I don't have the right answer. So if you watch this video and you think to yourself, you know what? I think I'd like to install that camera system in my property as well. I have a link in the description that'll take you directly to that system, and it is a link specifically from my channel. So if you would use that link, it would let them know that you found it through this video as opposed to a Google search. I would appreciate it if you would use that link to make the purchase. I'm going to give this project a difficulty rating of moderate, but even then that could be a little bit misleading. This project might be just next to impossible, or it could be extremely simple. It really comes down to how much difficulty you're going to have in routing the wires. And because there's really not a way to tell you this is going to be simple or this is going to be difficult, I gave it a moderate rating with an explanation. For me, for my use case, I knew that I wanted 3 cameras in or on the building, and so those were going to be simple. But I also knew that I wanted one of the cameras on my home, which is not connected to this building, and so that was going to be difficult. The Onwote system checked all the boxes. You know, it gave me the 24-hour surveillance. It gave me cameras that if I needed to access information off the camera, I didn't have to do it with a ladder. It has more storage than a single SD card. As a matter of fact, I'm on, I think, week 3 in 1 day, and I still show empty space on the hard drive. So, you know, ultimately this thing, who knows how long it'll record. I don't know at the time of recording this video. I'll add it in a comment later on, and I'll make it sticky so that you will know if you're reviewing the system. I am tired of being service feed to death on some sort of monthly subscription, so I wanted something that once it was installed, I didn't have to worry about any ongoing expenses. I did a separate unboxing video. I don't do unboxings, so go easy on me. So this is the initial box. Of course, it came in another shipping box, but once you remove it from there, this is the actual packaging. It's taped shut, I guess, to just kind of indicate to you that no one has been into it. The box itself is pretty nice. I'm not one of those folks that's really into packaging. To me, it's just something that I won't need after I'm finished with the product. But it does do the job of making sure that the contents are secure. So here we have our instruction book. I'll be into that in a little bit. 1, 2, 3, and 4 60-foot Cat 5 cables. And these are most certainly our cameras. We'll come back to those in just a moment. Let's see, what's this? Accessories. We'll find out what that is in just a moment. And here we have what is likely to be our recorder. And it is packaged separately inside of some, I wouldn't call this bubble wrap, but it is bubble wrap type material. Since it's here in front of me, let's start with the recorder. It's kind of interesting. That's an interesting design. It's not very heavy. I feel like this could be easily hidden. It does seem to have some stamped metal indentions to allow you to mount this onto a wall. Accessories, that's probably power supplies, if I were to guess. Ooh, a mouse, power cord, and a power supply, Cat 5 cable. Let's have a look at these cameras. Well, there you have it. Looks like a mounting plate. And the Cat 5/power connections. Just some wall anchors, and I'm certain these are weatherproofing connections for the Cat 5 to the camera. That is going to do it for the unboxing. Let's get into the actual setup. Now, it did come with setup instructions, and that'll be important later on. But as far as the installation of this setup, there were no instructions, and that actually may be by design. I wasn't able to find any to download on their website, but this system is pretty straightforward. You mount your camera where it's going to go. You mount your recording device, which in this case is an NVR, where it's going to go, and then you connect the two with a Ethernet cable, one end to the camera and one end to the recorder. Put some power to it, and just like that, it's on. Now, that's a little bit oversimplified, but that is the basic setup of this system. Without the instructions, the only mistake that I actually made was when I installed it, the cameras were upside down, which you can reverse through the NVR, I'm pretty sure. Although I didn't do that. It was just easier to grab the camera and simply rotate it inside of its socket to the correct position. And so that's the way that I solved that problem. Now, as far as mounting the NVR, it does need to be in a place where it can breathe. These things, they do make some heat. And so you wouldn't want to shove this thing like in maybe a drawer where maybe, you had everything plugged in and would close it up. It would just get too hot. This system does not come with a monitor. You're going to have to provide your own, but you are going to need one. Now, you don't have to have it forever. You can use it just for the setup, and once the setup is completed, then you can use the app or the app through a Windows computer or Mac to access everything from there, and that is a good option. For the first camera, I wanted this one completely outside. There was no awning overhead. This one was just on the wall of what I'm calling the front face of my shop, and it was going to be completely exposed to the weather. So the way that I installed this one was a little bit of double-sided tape on the base plate. It's not necessary. I just did it that way because I was up on a ladder, and the double-sided tape served as an extra pair of hands while I drilled the pilot holes to allow me to screw the base plate to the metal of the building. That was where I ran into my first problem. The screws that are supplied with the system are designed to go inside of a wall anchor, and they're just too soft. The metal was just not made to go into other pieces of metal. A quick trip to the hardware store, and I had the base plate mounted. Now, for this type of setup here, I needed the wire for the camera to pass straight through the base plate and into the building. A step bit made quick work of that, and once the hole was drilled, I simply passed the wire through and placed the camera onto the base plate and locked it in place. After that, you can rotate the camera body and the shroud to whatever position you need it to be in. So now with the NVR mounted and the first camera mounted, all that was left to do was to route the wire between the NVR and the camera. I started at the NVR in this case and worked my way toward the camera, but that's really not important. You could go either direction. And once I got them there, I plugged both ends in. Now in this setup here, the camera connection is indoors, so there's no need to use the weatherproofing here. But if you are going to be using the weatherproof connection, I'm going to skip to it right now. First, you're going to cover this unused port. These are just not used on this system. Next, you're going to get a little O-ring that's going to go across the connector that connects directly to the camera. Next, you're going to slide this little cap over the wire with the threads facing toward the RJ45 connector. Then you're going to need to get a hold of this split rubber grommet and slip it on. Next, the actual seal itself goes on, and you're going to go ahead and plug the wire in and screw the seal to the camera connection, leaving the little O-ring in there to make the first seal. Next, you're going to slide the rubber grommet into the base of the seal connector and push it inside of those little fingers. When you screw the cap on, those little fingers compress the rubber seal, and you have a seal on both ends of the connection. Now, as far as plugging it into the camera, you've only got one option. But as far as plugging into the NVR, in my case, there were 8 options. It doesn't matter. Just pick a port for any of the power over Ethernet ports and plug it in. They'll all work. Now, the second and third cameras were pretty much the same as the first. The only difference being in these cases, the way these cameras were going to be mounted, the wire wasn't going to be able to pass through the mounting plate. It was going to need to go to the side. Now the body of the camera actually has a notch already cut out for the wire to pass through. The fourth camera was by far the most challenging. The wire for the fourth camera had to go out of the shop, and it had to do that by passing through a pipe that I buried underground before the shop was ever built. So it passed through that pipe, under a sidewalk, into the crawl space of the home, maybe 25 or 30 feet to one side, where it popped right back out of a wall where an old, no longer used satellite TV cable was in the place. I pulled it out, used that existing hole, and pushed the wire right through. Went up into the soffit, and then into the attic. Then we went into the attic, across to the front side of the house, and back down through the soffit again, and into the camera on the front porch. And just watching that sequence makes me tired. So that one wire took not quite a full day. It was a monster. The only reason it took so long is because I was doing it by myself. So I would get up in the attic and I would, start to pull the wire, and a kink would develop in the wire and come into the hole that I had drilled, and I didn't have anybody outside to kind of straighten that kink out and let it push through. So, man, there was a ton of back and forth trips. Get a helper to run the wire. Now, the kit came with 60-foot spools of wire for each camera, and that's plenty for most use applications. So if you're like me and the 60-foot cable is just not going to do it, I was able to get a hold of this 300-foot roll for around $40. Now, I already had the crimpers and the little RJ45s. That's the little crimp that goes on the end of the wire. And I've been doing this a while, so I didn't need a tester. But if you've never done this, it's actually pretty simple. You can get yourself a tester, crimpers, and RJ45s in a kit, and they're not very expensive. And it is something you can learn on YouTube and probably be pretty proficient at it in a couple of hours. Now, if you find yourself having to run a cable through a pipe, I've got a pretty interesting trick I'm going to show you in this video. You're going to need some nylon twine, some lightweight string, something very flexible, very lightweight, a cotton ball, and a shop vac. Make sure your cotton ball slides easily in and out of the pipe that you're using. If it doesn't, remove some of it and make sure that it is a very, very easy fit. Tie your lightweight string around the cotton ball, and it would be helpful if you had someone else on the other end, although you don't have to. Go to the other end of the pipe and connect your vacuum so that now you're drawing air through the pipe. Drop your lightweight string and tie it on cotton ball into the other side, and in just a matter of a second, your cotton ball will pop out on the other side. Now that lightweight string it is important because it had to be very flexible, not create a lot of drag, and be very light so the cotton ball could drag it through the pipe fairly easily, but it probably won't be strong enough to pull a wire through. So this is where you take your nylon twine, connect that to your nylon string, and then pull the lightweight string out, bringing the nylon twine with it. So now you have nylon twine on both ends of the pipe. Now it's as simple as connecting the nylon twine to the Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable. Make sure that you've secured it very well. I use a little bit of wire bent over the string tied into a knot, and some tape to make a nice point that will slide over obstructions if there are any in your pipe, and then pull it through. Again, it would be helpful if you had someone feeding you wire on one side while you were pulling from the other. Now, if you run into a situation like I did where you have to route some of the wire outside of your wall, try to get a hold of the UV rated or rated for outdoor use Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable. If you can't get a hold of that, you can just run normal Cat 5 or Cat 6 through a piece of conduit. It basically comes down to the UV rays from the sun eventually wear off the insulation of that wire, and you would be in a situation where you had to replace it, and that would be no fun. But back to installing the system. Once you have that longer cable stubbed out on both ends, re-terminate your RJ45s on there if necessary, and once they are terminated, go ahead and plug it into the NVR and to the camera on the other end. Now you're going to need to plug in your monitor to the NVR. Mine came only with a HDMI or a VGA output, so be careful when you're buying your monitor. Make sure that it will support that, because I know a lot of the newer stuff has moved on to other types of cables. You're also going to need to plug in your mouse, and of course the last thing to do is connect the internet through a wired connection to your NVR. There is no wireless support here, and you wouldn't want wireless support. It kind of makes it easy for the hackers. With everything plugged in, you're pretty much finished installing, and now it's time to turn everything on. Earlier I said there were no installation instructions, and there were not. And we didn't need them. But you are going to need the user manual because it does have the setup instructions, and you are going to need those. The instruction book was very good. Select your language, number 1. Number 2, it gave you the default username and password, and it prompts you to log in with that. And as soon as you have, the very next thing you have to do is to change the default username and password. So be ready for that. Make sure you got something to record your new username and password with. It will not let you proceed until you've made that change. The next thing it prompted me for was a pattern to unlock. I did skip that step. That just didn't seem like something that I was interested in. And then it wants you to set the time zone. And then the last step for this portion of the setup was to enable DHCP. And just like that, the NVR setup is completed. The phone instructions were just like the rest of the instructions. It was step by step, and everything that was in the booklet is exactly what happened on my phone screen and on the monitor for the system. Now on a computer there were a few things that happened. For example, I had a couple of windows that popped up that were not in the instructions. After a minute of kind of just being careful about what I was doing, I ended up just closing those windows and continuing with the instructions as listed in the booklet. The only problem that I ran into with setting it up on the computer was there is an option to access everything through a browser. Now, I didn't try it in every browser. I tried it in Chrome because that's my preferred browser. And there was an extension that it didn't work, and it didn't tell me what that plugin was. So I wasn't able to get that to work. But it doesn't matter. When you set it up on the computer, you download the app for that as well. And you can do everything through the app. And in fact, I think I prefer it. With all that, you're complete. The only thing left to do, if you wanted to, would be to go back and maybe plug some of the holes that you drilled, which I am going to do off camera. I'm also going to take a little bit of silicone, and I'm going to run around the upper edge of the camera that is completely exposed to the sky. I don't know that that's necessary. It looks fairly well made where water shouldn't be getting on the inside, but I don't really see what it would hurt, so I'm going to do that. With your system installed, so what happens if you have someone pilfering around and you need to get a copy of some segment of video to the police? Well, you've got a few options to do that as well. The first option that I tried was plugging a flash drive into the unused USB port on the NVR itself and exporting video directly to that. It worked really well, except the only media player that I could find that would play both video and audio was VLC Media Player. When I used the computer app to download a video from the NVR via internet, that wasn't an issue. I really don't understand why there's a difference there, but there was. When that video came over, it would play in any media player that I tried to use, and it would play it with audio. So that would be something that I would mention to the engineers over at Onwote. Maybe they wanted to have a look at that and see where the problem with that was at. But there is a good way around it in the meantime. Now, when you're trying to pull these videos, you're going to notice little areas that are, colored, and that's going to indicate to you that there was motion tracked during that time. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that oftentimes the motion would actually start a few seconds before. Maybe it was just on the edge of the screen or kind of far away before the camera actually noticed and picked it up. And that could be a problem if you were only allowed to export, the actual motion captured areas that are already pre-selected for you. But they've got a solution for that as well. You can actually go in and timestamp the export area. So you could say, I want from this camera, from this time, hour, minute, second, to this time, hour, minute, second again, and hit download. And it would allow you to download that video in its entirety if you had an issue like that. Now this is obviously me and my son here. This gives you an idea of how the camera system looks. You'd be able to give this to your local authorities, and they would have all 4 segments from the cameras and be able to see exactly what was going on. Now you may be noticing there's a lot of motion blur. Yeah, the motion blur was kind of heavy. As long as the person is fairly still, it's a reasonably clear image. But it's important to remember that these cameras are not really. It's not really fair to compare this to, say, a GoPro or the camera on your phone. They use a different kind of compression. They use a lower frame rate. They do all these things to try to conserve space on your recording device so that you can get as many days recorded as possible. Now, there is a pretty big trade-off there with the slight graininess to the images and the blurriness when you have high levels of motion. I'll come back to that motion blur a little bit later on in the video, but for now let's move on to the final thoughts. So the good, we'll start with the good things. The cameras are sturdy. They are made out of metal. I was actually very surprised when I picked the cameras up and I thought, man, are these metal? And they sounded metal. They felt metal. But the paint job is also really good. The paint was so good it was actually hard for me to tell for certain. I scraped back a little area on accident when I was drilling, and yeah, they're metal. The build quality is pretty good. I didn't look at any of these cameras and find anything that didn't quite fit together. There were no misalignments. There was really not anything that would allow me to point to it and say, there is evidence of a pretty big quality control issue. I was very happy with the overall build quality. But I think for most people, this would be a fairly simple setup with just a little bit of a headache involved with routing your wires. And let's not forget, wireless systems also have to have wires routed. So to me, if you're routing a wire anyway, you might as well go with a fully wired power over Ethernet system, but that is just my opinion. I've been tinkering with this camera for just a little over 3 weeks. I wanted to get a good full test in, see how it went. The app has never once failed me. I used to have a very similar setup from a different company, and the app for that system was constantly kicking me off, telling me that I couldn't be verified. It would tell me that I couldn't be logged in on more than one device, even though I was only logged in on one device. This system here was much more user-friendly and about half the cost of the system that I installed at my old house. Now, the controls weren't always 100% clear. Just kind of an example, if you wanted to rename a camera, there's nothing real clear that shows you how you would rename your camera. But once you figure out how to rename your camera, you're like, oh, well, that was actually pretty simple. The bad, and I kind of already mentioned there were some playback issues when taking the videos directly from the NVR. That shouldn't be. In my opinion, when you pull a video off that NVR, it should play on any device that would play any other type of media. So, again, I'm going to stress, I think that's something that the guys over at Onwote should take a look at. And as I already mentioned, the motion blur was pretty high. It wasn't so high as to make the cameras unusable. Having said that, I would be willing to give up a little bit of storage capacity if I thought increasing the frame rate would do away with some of the motion blur problems. I set the frame rate to the maximum, which was 25 frames per second. Maybe 30 or 35 frames per second would help with that. I'm not certain. Maybe it's some other setting. I don't know. Overall, I like the system. They're at a good price point. The cameras are fairly easy to install once you get past having to route a wire. If I had had this at my old house and when I moved here, I very likely would have bought it again. So how much money can you save by doing this yourself? I'm going to give you my prices as Jason with Born Handy, and I checked these prices with some other folks that do similar types of work, and we were all within about 15% of each other on our pricing. I'm not going to share theirs. I will tell you that I was not the most expensive. I was also not the least expensive. But if I were installing this system for you in a building like this, and I did all 4 cameras on one structure, and I had access just like this building does, you would have been looking at $550 for the full installation, but that's after you provide the camera system. If you were going to ask me to do all 4 of these in a standard home in an attic, so nothing crazy, not like a really hard to get to attic or an attic that's chopped up and there's only access to certain places. You know, if you've got an attic where I can walk around in every portion of your home, costs a lot more. There's a lot more risk involved with being in an attic. It's a lot more uncomfortable. And of course, you get that insulation all over you, which is the best part. Attic installation would have been around $1,600. If my house had belonged to you and you called me out and I had to run that wire and you had taken the time to bury that pipe ahead of time, that's important. This would have cost you around $1,250. Again, you providing the cable and the security camera system. So that should give you a pretty good idea of how much money you could save by doing this job yourself. So as we're winding this video down, I would like to thank the Onwote folks for my very first YouTube sponsorship, and I would like to thank you for watching me fumble through it. So with the cameras installed and the shameless plug asking you to subscribe to my channel and to ring the notification bell one more time, this has been Jason with Born Handy, and I hope to see you in the next one.